Recap. I wanted to end the regular season with a little bit of a surprise, so welcome the one and only, my roommate that you've never met before, Elon. Elon does the recaps with me in my league. We watch it every Sunday together. I definitely respect his opinion, and I have a high bar for fantasy expertise, so he's going to weigh in a little bit. I'll be leading it, but I'll ask him some questions, just add another objective opinion that might be helpful.
First recaps in our league.
What was that?
The beginning of the recaps was in my league.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. The idea for recaps that I knew of was in the league, and you started it, right?
I did start the recaps. So.
This is a history lesson. If anyone ever asks you who started the recaps, probably other leagues as well, but for us, it's Elon. Okay. So massive week. Let's just dive into it. So the first matchup was very consequential. Team the Prophet versus Team the Chairman. This meant a lot for the Team the Prophet. Team the Chairman still secured a bye, so we'll talk about him next. But Team the Prophet needed this win, got it, locked up a playoff spot. For this team, I mean, you could weigh in here. For me, there's so many weaknesses here. I've talked about both the running back and wide receiver positions. At running back, I like Montgomery, but that RB2 slot, while he has Mike Davis on a bye and potentially not usable if McCaffrey comes back, that RB2 spot with Nyheim Hines, despite doing decent lately, I mean, 6 carries, 10 yards. He got in the end zone, but come on, 3 targets. So that's a concern, but mainly that wide receiver spot. He has Diggs, who's great, but Ayuk and Watkins, just big question marks. Watkins, I don't think should be startable. Ayuk, I understand. 9 targets, great. 95 yards, fantastic, and a touchdown. But Debo getting more involved, that offense still question marks. It's just not someone I'd love. And then Amari in the flex. So I just broke down the whole team, but it's essentially saying outside of Diggs, I don't even love anyone. I like Montgomery, and then I about everyone else outside of quarterback Mahomes. But anyway, I know you have insight. Mahomes is your quarterback. Do you have any insight, though?
Who does he have on his bench? I'm just curious to see.
Yeah, so Lamar Jackson, he made that trade. I think I told you before, this was one of the bigger trades where he traded Rodgers for Lamar and Mike Davis. But he lost Fuller for the year, so that's part of it.
So I actually think that it's, first off, with Will Fuller, it becomes much more competitive. No Will Fuller, the team is a lot less competitive. However, it does look like Mike Davis is going to be back from a bye week in time for the playoffs. He'll be able to insert Amari Cooper into the starting lineup to replace Sammy Watkins. From the flex to the wide receiver spot. And I think he's actually in a decent position. I mean, I think that what the worst thing that could have happened to him was losing Will Fuller. But I still think that looking at this team without having ever seen it before, there's no doubt it's a playoff caliber team.
And even with the McCaffrey potentially coming back, you're saying Mike Davis, you would still start.
That's a good point. That's a good point. But McCaffrey did get hurt, so and I assume he's going to be shut down this season. He just got hurt in practice. So if there is a big question mark attached to that, it's assuming that McCaffrey is in fact going to miss the rest of the season, considering he tweaked his quad in practice today.
Mm-hmm. To me, this is the team I'd want to play the most in the playoffs, but we'll review the other teams, and you'll be able to give your perspective on that.
That's true. I haven't seen the other teams.
Team the Chairman got a bye, so got to be happy there. This is a team that really has been carried by that running back group. Despite an off week for Derrick Henry, you got to feel really good about Derrick Henry, James Robinson being your running backs. And the wide receiver group is a bunch of high-end wide receiver 2s, no weaknesses, doesn't have that top-tier wide receiver 1 guy, but has a lot of consistency and guys you can rely on in that wide receiver position. This is a very similar team actually to Elon's league. Elon has in his league, he has Justin Jefferson, he has Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and he has McLaurin, and he used to have James Robinson. So since you have a lot of probably insight on this, what do you think about this team?
I think it's a really strong team. I mean, again, having not seen the rest of the league, I'm not sure, but I can't imagine a team better than this. Justin Jefferson, over the last few weeks, has been a wide receiver 1. He's gotten the targets, and he's gotten the production, he's gotten the touchdowns. He got a weak performance from Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry's been one of the top running backs this season overall. Robinson, especially as of late, has been a top running back. I guess the biggest question mark has been Roethlisberger, who had a pretty good week, but I think he's been a bit inconsistent this season overall. So I don't know if he has a backup quarterback, but to me, everything besides quarterback looks really stellar.
Great, yeah. So congrats, Chairman, on the bye. We'll look at the playoff matchups and give some predictions after this. But for now, let's dive into the next very consequential game. It was essentially win and you're in. I didn't look at the exact points, but Banditos gets the loss, misses the playoffs. Painter gets the win, makes the playoffs. So Banditos, the trade worked out. I mean, you got a great game out of Rodgers, and that's all you could hope for. Mike Davis wouldn't have been able to help this week on bye. So that's not really what it came down to. What it really came down to is your running backs. Just a very, bigger names, guys who can produce, but just in not the position to do so. Mostert in a questionable offense and backfield right now, only 5.3. And then Miles Sanders in the most questionable offense. And very questionable backfield with Boston Scott being involved when the game script's negative, which is always with the Eagles, only giving you 3.1. And that's really what differentiated this game. It was a 23-point difference. If you got decent to solid games from your running backs, you probably win this game. So, I mean, their wide receivers are a whole other conversation, but to me, it all comes down to running backs. Does it make sense to you that this team missed the playoffs?
Absolutely, and this is a very 6-7 team, just seeing it again for the first time. Miles Sanders disappointing this year, Raheem Mostert. Just interestingly, going into the year, those are probably two guys you would have expected a lot better, possibly breakout seasons from. Miles Sanders' second year with Philadelphia, and Raheem Mostert just getting that big contract extension. So both guys getting hurt in addition to having poor production. I think it's been disappointing, but just again, overall looking at the makeup of this team, it looked very much like a 6-7 team.
Great, yeah. And then for Team Pain Train made it. For me, this is a very, very scary team. I mean, Dalvin Cook, Aaron Jones, terrifying running backs. DK Metcalf, Cup, terrifying wide receivers. Wide receiver 3 is the only position. Oh, and Gallman also in the flex being a running back, part of that running back group. Wide receiver 3 being the only spot where I'm questionable on. I know you got Antonio Brown as an option. You have Galladay if he comes back. And then is Curtis Samuel, what's the COVID list?
That would make sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with Curtis Samuel, but he had been fantasy relevant.
Could return this week.
So a lot of options there, although they're not great. But I mean, everyone else just so solid, and I think Kyler Murray's been underperforming. So for me, this is a team on the flip side of the other 7-6 team, Team Profit. I want to play the most. This team, I probably want to play the least out of the 4 teams that didn't get a bye.
Okay, my issue with this team, and I think you're right, a lot of the points, Kyler Murray's been been a lot weaker as of late after starting the year really well. He hasn't been performing as well, 3 straight weeks of underperformances, I think under 20. Aaron Jones, a lot of his work this week and his production was because of the 75-yard touchdown run he put in at the end of the game. He's still splitting carries with Jamal Williams, so... but yeah, I think that overall it's still it's going to be a scary team to play. I think, though, there's still no doubts and concerns.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we're on similar pages. This game, less relevant. I don't know. Paco Libre would have went 6-7, so I guess it would come down to points if they would have made it with a win. I could peek really quickly. If Paco Libre did win, their points overall would not have been enough to go in. So they would have needed like 300 points or something. So this game will breeze over. It was essentially two teams that weren't going to make it no matter what. Team Straight Knockout got the win. Let's look at both these teams really, really quickly. Paco Libre is a team I actually liked more earlier in the season. David Johnson, Kenny Drake's 2 guys I had earlier in the season. But the wide receiver group is what terrified me. DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, and then Debo now performing really well. So for me, this team was terrifying early on, but not enough to make it. For you, I mean, it makes sense why they didn't make it, given that DeAndre's been underperforming a little bit. Michael Thomas had his issues this season. Kenny Drake had an injury. David Johnson had an injury. But, I mean, if you were to rank top 6 teams, I know you haven't seen the whole league, but do you feel like there's a team that on the left that would look like they would make the playoffs?
Absolutely, I actually do. And Justin Herbert had a down week, but he's been really good overall. I think you're right. I mean, who's his backup running backs that he was starting? David Johnson, Kenyon Drake, who's been hurt a lot of the season, so that's an issue. He has great wide receivers. Yeah, Ronald Jones, Duke Johnson. Actually, I'm going to take
Ronald
that
Anderson, back. A wide receiver too.
Okay, I'm going to take that back.
Okay.
His wide receiver. Wait, let me see for a second. His wide receiver core does look good. Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, but Michael Thomas hurt a lot of the season, and also Kenyon Drake, David Johnson, not very strong. So I think I was just maybe overacting a little of the wide receivers. But yeah, this definitely does not look like a playoff team considering the lack of strength at running back.
For me, if I were to re-rank the team, I would give this team like 6th best right now. Like if they were to start the season today with these rosters, I would say this team would squeeze in at the end of the playoffs, but that's not how it works.
No surprise that it made.
Yeah, definitely looking back, it's no surprise. Team Straight Knockout for me is a whole nother story. I mean, for me, there's not much to like about this team. It's kind of surprised both these teams ended up with the same record. As far as where it went wrong, I think it really boils down to mainly being James Conner. James Conner just a massive disappointment this year, and then of course George Kittle getting injured was bad news for Team Straight Knockout. So outside of that, you look at the rest of the team. I mean, I understand starting some of these guys, but really it's only Adam Thielen that I would want to have to start on my team out of all the guys he has here, and then maybe TJ Hawkinson at tight end. So it makes sense. I don't think there's much else to say. Do you?
No, he had a really good performance from Corday. He had a bunch of guys who had like 1 or 2 really good weeks during the season, so he felt like it was okay to for them to be the starters, but that's definitely not the case. These are not consistent players.
Yes. Okay. So this is where it gets interesting. This is the team I thought was the best, and I'm curious your point of view because things changed briefly.
Okay.
Professor S got the loss actually to a team when we went with Jared, a team that he's much better than. But fortunately for him, El Professor still makes the bye, so didn't cost him. But what really is interesting to me is where this team ends up with the Gibson injury. I praise this team not only for having fantastic players, but also great depth. Look at this team right here. So Deshaun Watson at quarterback, you got to love. Running backs, Alvin Kamara, Antonio Gibson, and in the flex, he has Chris Carson. Wide receivers, Devontae Adams, Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley. Tight end was more of a question mark. I think he has Ertz and Fant on the bench, so I think Fant's the guy. He had Mixon on IR, so if he ever came back. Jonathan Taylor on the bench. McKissick, who I told you I love, especially I think there's a full point PPR league. 10 targets, 10 catches, like his third of the last 5 weeks where he had at least double-digit targets, which is unheard of for even a wide receiver. And then Giovanni Bernard with Mixon out. This is the deepest team I've ever seen in any fantasy league. Oh, Godwin questionable. Like, look at it. Wow, you see it. It's crazy how deep this team is. So you lose Gibson. So the question is, who do you lean on? There's a lot of options here. I'd probably go Jonathan Taylor. To me, this is still, even with that injury, still the best team in the league. I would not go Austin Hooper, though. Red flag if you have to start out Austin Hooper. I much prefer Fant. But I mean, do you think any team we've talked about is better than Professor S?
Maybe. Here's why. If Antonio, so you said it was a bye week?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So I was going to say, if Antonio Gibson can't go next week, that would be an issue because I actually am probably a little bit lower on the other running backs. I guess he can put Chris Carson in there, but Chris Carson, as Pete Carroll said, actually is not 100%, and a lot of his points ended up on that big touchdown catch he got earlier in the game. And if he was forced to start Jonathan Taylor, that's very inconsistent in terms of their usage of running backs. J.D. McKissick, it depends on whether they're down. If they're down, he gets the ball. If not, they're running with Peyton Barber / Antonio Gibson. Although Gibson then in my scenario would be out, and Gio Bernard I actually think is maybe even a cut option, but probably not. Chris Godwin's a big name on paper, but overall this season he actually hasn't been that good. So I think it's the best team. I'm just putting
yes.
I'm just putting some other like being devil's advocate a little bit because if he does have to bench Antonio Gibson, that would be an issue. And also there are some guys on the bench that have been a bit inconsistent. So, but yeah, I mean, and Ridley just another thing. And Julio Jones is back, but yeah, I mean, very very good. He could easily swap Godwin for Ridley if he needs to do that.
Yes. Okay. So I think we're both saying best team in the league, but there's now some vulnerability. This Gibson gives you some vulnerability. Let's see what happens in the playoffs. Still my pick to win it all. We went with Jared. Congrats on the upset. I mean, you look at this team, it also makes a lot of sense. Chubb and Elliott, two guys who are solid, but Chubb injury concerns, Zeke underperformances. Wide receiver group, you also had injuries with Julio Jones, and he had someone else that got injured earlier this season. I'm forgetting. Le'Veon Bell ended up, for the Jets, ended up being nothing. So you look, Hollywood Brown being one of the bigger fantasy disappointments. So you look at this team, it just makes a lot of sense. They're not a playoff team, and 4-9 to me sounds right.
Yeah, absolutely. Ezekiel, a huge name, not a good season based on his ADP. Russell Wilson also has been disappointing since the start of the season, and Julio Jones disappointing because of injuries. So there's really not a lot to say. There's a lot of big name players who didn't step up and perform the way he expected.
Definitely. This game we thought would be more consequential this last game. Titties up, titties down against El Captain. Titties up, titties down is TBD, just heads up. I don't know why, but that's how they did it. But El Captain still was able to squeeze in despite the loss because of how other games went. So you look at titties up, titties down here. 155, solid week. Going to the playoffs at 8-5. I mean, you could see the team here. For me, it's a little bit of it's a playoff team for sure, but to me, they're not as scary as the other teams we talked about. So that's honestly all I really have to say. You got to hope DeAndre Swift comes back and has a big impact. You got to hope Josh Jacobs comes back and has a big impact. But even with those guys, to me, it's a 7 out of 10 team that could win a playoff game for sure. But are they going to string together 3 since they didn't get the bye? They just missed that bye at 8-5. I don't see it happening. Do you?
Let me just quickly look at this team again. No, I don't. I mean, if you're starting Melvin Gordon, you're starting Michael Pittman, it's not a good look. Tyler Lockett has not been very good since he's had those massive breakout performances. Yeah, you have to hope DeAndre Swift comes back. Basically everything that you just said. However, I do want to ask you a question. Can they give nicknames to all their players?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think
I was a bit I'll show you this whole app.
Okay, I was a bit distracted because I was looking at the nicknames he gave to Melvin Gordon, Josh Allen, Austin Eckler, and DeAndre Swift. So
yeah, so I mean, if you get Swift and Jacobs back, you have Eckler, Swift, and Jacobs at running back, including the flex, and I mean that's solid. But I just don't see it measuring up, especially with that wide receiver group that's also decent. Again, it's a playoff team. I don't think it's going to win 3 straight, but we'll keep an eye out on it.
Yeah.
El Captain, another team that's making the playoffs, would need 3 straight wins. Another team
They're making the playoffs 6 and 7.
Yes.
Okay, 6 out of 10. All right, yeah.
Exactly. This team, though, way more than the team I said before that we were just talking about. Titties up, titties down has maybe in my eyes like a 10 to 15% chance of winning it all. And with 6 teams, that's a little bit less than you'd expect. This team's under 10% in my opinion. I mean, definitely makes sense that it just squeezed in as 6 and 7. Shouldn't make the playoffs normally, but this league lets a little bit more teams in the playoffs than I think we would ideally like. I think we've talked about this. At most, half the league, in my opinion, should make the playoffs, but that's a whole nother conversation. Fortunately for them, they have Kelsey, but unless they get McCaffrey back, look at this team. I mean, what can you be expecting?
There's nothing good.
Gurley, most disappointing guy. Kareem Hunt, a backup running back. He has fantasy value, sure, but whatever. Juju, Cole Beasley, Kirk at wide receiver, like.
Cole Beasley, out of the 5 you just mentioned, Cole Beasley's actually been the best, stunningly enough, and he's the worst name on the list.
So I mean, this team looks like a first round exit unless they have a massive upset, and even if they do, there's no way they win 3 straight. No way. I think I actually done chained this team in week 2. And I still feel that way.
Wow.
You're done. There's no chance you win it all.
He needs McCaffrey to come back.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah. I stick by the done chain meant you're not going to win it all. I'm 100%. If I can go back and say, yo, he made the playoffs, I just give myself a dap and say, yeah, no, we're still done chaining him. So call me weird. Maybe I am. Okay, so looking at the playoffs, we see Chairman on bye. We see El Professor on bye. So it's Team the Prophet and Pain Train and El Captain and Titties Up, Titties Down. For me, I think the 2 bye teams will be in the finals. I see El Professor winning that final game, but I can see a Pain Train upset of the Chairman in the semis. But I'm still going to stick with the Chairman. Do you have any different opinions?
Just going based on my memory from just looking at this for the first time, Professor S, I do think is the best team, with the exception of hopefully Gibson comes back healthy in 2 weeks, and the second team that we talked about with Ben Roethlisberger at quarterback, I think it was, or is Professor S is Ben Roethlisberger?
I think Pain Train.
Whoever the second team we talked about, I think is the second best team.
Yeah.
With Roethlisberger.
Chairman.
Yeah, I think the Chairman has the second best team, and I think he has the best opportunity at competing for a championship.
Okay, I love that. I'm going to flip my prediction. I say Pain Train upsets Chairman in the semis. Pain Train, Professor finals. Professor wins. Have a great week. Not sure if we're going to do playoffs. I'll talk to, I'll have a conversation and we'll see what happens. But if not, it's been a fantastic year. Elon, thank you for joining me.
It's nice to meet all of you. Really appreciate it.
Best of luck in the playoffs. Go get the dub. Bye.